Go. Welcome to the PRCA Fuse podcast. This week I'm joined by Goodkind of Frank PR. In this podcast we talk about Frank reaching the milestone of 25 years, how a job in telesales served as a great grounding for Graham in PR, one of the weirdest competitions in the world in which someone could win a chance to live forever, possibly the greatest agency deal ever done or series of deals ever done for an agency, from Graham's perspective, and the future of Frank. Enjoy this. Thank you for joining us in the podcast, Graham.
Thank you for having me.
First of all, could you tell our listeners a little bit about who you are and what your role is at Frank?
Well, I'm Graham Goodkind, and I am the founder and chairman of Frank. I founded the business in September 2000, so we're just coming up to 25 years old and celebrating our 25th anniversary, obviously, this year, which is kind of a good reason to talk, I guess, to you and the PRCA audience.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's an amazing feat. Congratulations. 25 years of being in business is a fantastic feat in the PR agency world. And I think over the last 25 years, Frank's always stood out as an agency to me, as an agency that's really, really helped shape, particularly consumer PR. And I feel that the agency is very distinctive. You've got behind you, we create Talkability there, and I feel like you've created a really strong brand. Can we start off by reflecting a little bit about that, about how you've managed to do that over the last 25 years? Has this been by design? You talk about Talkability, you've come up with stuff like Sneeze Marketing. I remember that came out. You're known for your creative work, and you're known for creating a culture for creativity as well. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, look, and the short answer to your question was it's completely deliberate, in terms of, I've always felt that when you start an agency, so many people start an agency and go, oh, I'm really good at PR, and I'm going to set up, and I'm going to get together with a person, a couple of people, whatever it might be, and I'm going to do PR. Oh, there's thousands and thousands and thousands of agencies out there, as we know, and I always thought it was very important when I intended to set up a PR agency, which I always had in the back of my mind. I worked for 9-10 years, and I ran a very famous agency in its time called Lim Franks, and
legendary.
That had a very distinctive personality. Not always the perfect positioning, but it had a very strong brand positioning, and the kind of inspiration for Absolutely Fabulous and those days, which had its strengths and had its weaknesses as well, but had a very strong brand positioning. I always thought, if I'm going to set up my own agency one day, which I always wanted to, then strong brand positioning was important. I'd sort of always used this word Talkability, and I'd always liked it, and it had been bandied about, and it was common parlance within our industry, but no one had ever kind of taken control of it or ownership of it. Everyone just used it without necessarily kind of doing anything about it. And I always thought it's a lovely positioning to have as an agency, is this word is something that creates Talkability. So I registered it as a trademark back in 2000. So I let the motorbike go past. I registered it as an agency as a trademark in 2000. So we still got it as a registered trademark of the agency today. And when I originally thought about setting up Frank and starting an agency, that was almost my working title for the agency was Talkability. But instead, we came up with the name Frank, which I think was a much better name, and also a very strong positioning in itself. Frank being about down to earth, no bullshit, straight to the point, tell it like it is, which at that time, 25 years ago, was a bit contradictory to what people's perceptions were of the PR industry. It was fluffy, it was blow smoke up your arse type characters who just, wanted to please and said whatever it took to please clients. Frank was, it's what I'm like as a person. So it was very important that an agency kind of embodied that. I would have felt very uncomfortable being another sort of person and not being able to be frank with clients. And I think it's a better way to operate as well. So we had the frankness, plus we had Talkability, which instead of being an agency name went more to become a kind of process and a methodology. And I always want to say, I'm an agency that have creativity at its core. It's the bit I've always enjoyed the most. Is coming up with the ideas, the creative process, the highs and lows of doing that. Um, Frank was the name. Talkability was the proposition, if you like, and the product that we offered. All about disruptive creativity. And, we would then become a brand positioning, which was all about selling ideas, not selling time. I added to that as well, which at that point in the industry, 25 years ago, was alien to the industry, was no timesheets. We weren't going to be an agency that worked to time. It was all about our input. It wasn't about our input. It was about our output. Clients didn't worry if an idea took us 5 minutes or 5 days to come up. That wasn't their problem as long as it was a bloody brilliant idea. That was essentially our offer. And all of a sudden, we had a very good package and a very differentiated proposition within the market that, actually 25 years later has absolutely stood the test of time. We still use the word talkability as much as we ever did before. We still don't have timesheets, and we work to, creating results, and it's all about creating value and results for clients as opposed to how much time we put in to do that or paying us by the hour. So a lot of those principles or the essence of that brand proposition still endures today 25 years later, which kind of makes me very happy and very proud, because it's kind of what I enjoy doing. And I think people that work here lap that up, enjoy it. Other people that don't enjoy it probably don't end up working here because it's not for them, and I get that. We're a bit of a, not an acquired taste, but not everyone, some people like a more structured and formed environment, and they like processing and selling hours and doing that. I get that, and I'm fine with that, because I think there's plenty of room for all different offers in this market. But I think our market offer has endured, and 25 years later, we're still rocking and rolling.
And being distinctive in your part of the market is super important, because it's really competitive in the creative market, in the creative PR market, right? Do you ever look back in the last 25 years and thought, I wish I'd gone into something which is a bit more defendable, or a little bit a little bit easier to thrive in, less competitive, let's say?
Yeah, well, look, I think anyone that knows me would know that I'm probably about the most competitive person that I know.
Oh,
So,
really?
oh yeah, my kids are 25 now, twins. I've got Summer and Dexter. Someone's in PR, actually. A little plug for her as well. Works at a rival agency, Tin Man, down the road. So,
Nice.
she's hopefully following in some of the footsteps, although making much better footsteps herself. But they'll tell you, I never used to let them win at anything. We used to play whatever game we were playing, drafts, or, as a kid, or dominoes, whatever. I didn't want to lose. Table tennis, I couldn't believe it. I was so upset. About 3 years ago, my son beat me for the first time at table tennis. I was like grumpy for the rest of the day. I don't know. That's me. So working in a naturally competitive industry, I kind of don't mind. I think you've got to be a good sport about it. You're going to win pitches, you're going to lose pitches. And I love that. You kind of lose a pitch, you dust yourself down and get on with the next one. You win a pitch. Anyone, again, that knows me and has worked here knows that I don't get very high on winning a pitch. Great, on with the pitch, on to the next one. If we've won it or lost it, to be honest. I always say, and I like to give the advice to a lot of people, it's a bit of a roller coaster, this industry, because it is so competitive, don't get too high on the highs, then you won't get too low on the lows, because there are a lot of, kind of highs and lows in this industry, and your emotions can swing a lot. So I think it's quite important to keep an even keel amidst all that competitiveness. So no, I don't mind it being a competitive environment. I think you've got the right attitude and approach to it. And to me, that's part of the fun.
Yeah, I had a similar conversation with Will and David from Pangolin last week, and I think I mentioned to you, Will said to me, it's a great quote from Winston Churchill, which was, "Success is the ability to go from failure to failure with enthusiasm." And I think in a competitive industry like ours, that's got to be something you hold on to, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it does play with you, and there is a bit of an effect that people have when they say this job is can be stressful. I think there's lots of pressure in this job, and I think stress and pressure get a bit confused. But the stress comes from beating yourself up, getting and I think it does come from that emotional swings that you can be party to. And I kind of maybe that's my natural state, but I think that's the way to exist in this market. People get a lot carried away. You've got lots of rewards, lots of opportunities for highs, but unfortunately, there's lots of opportunities for lows. You do lose pitches, you do lose clients. Good people do go. You just got to treat all those moments, good and bad, pretty much the same, and get on with it and maintain your competitive spirit. And I would say, I'm just as competitive now as I was when I set the business up 25 years ago. Maybe a little bit more competitive. I don't know.
But the reward is the great work, the output. Like the body of work that has come out of Frank in the last 25 years is enviable by anyone's standards, I'd say. And we were talking about the standard of work in the industry before we started recording this, and debating about whether agencies today might have lost their edge a bit when it comes to pushing clients to be brave. Could you tell us a bit more about your view on that, and maybe give us an example of where you've managed to help a client overcome some nervousness over a campaign?
Yeah, no, it's a good question, and it's one that I've personally, it's a personal view, and I think maybe you share it as well. But I think that the campaigns that we're doing as an industry have fallen into a very formulaic type of idea, and as a professional, I find it quite boring and dull and not very challenging, to your point. And whether that's because agencies aren't challenging themselves, or agencies aren't challenging their clients, or I personally think that it's just a factor of life these days in the economy, is that clients aren't going for ideas that are a bit more out there as much as they were, I think, because of the perceived, and I use the word perceived, risk involved, in that I think clients are charting a much safer course, if you like, and maybe avoiding certain ideas that in the past, would have got massive reward for that brand and massive cut through. But, were maybe a bit more challenging to get through the business or to sell into other departments or senior management within a client business. And I look at the kind of research plus celebrity plus pop-up activation or photo of some sort, usually at somewhere like Potter's Field.
Good old Potter's Field.
And I look, and on the one hand, I think brilliant, good on the agency. They've managed to sell that to a client. They're getting paid a nice fee to do that, presumably, and they're kind of doing a nice activation that the client is happy with. And I look at that and I think good, because that's your job as a owner of a business, to create value for your shareholders, etc. And then I look at that on the other hand and I think it's so samey and it's so me too, and I'm not sure what results that gets for clients. And even survey-led stories, I'm not quite sure. I've never been sure. It's just like a view I've had forever. It's not just a new one. I'm not quite sure what value that gets for clients. Sure, people talk about the survey story or the research story, but do they even remember which brand came up with it? And we do, because we read them and we've got a keen eye on it because that's our job and that's our industry. But do you think a punter out there really, means anything to them about the brand that provides that story? I'm not so sure. So I kind of get a bit dismayed sometimes, and even here when we're talking through ideas with clients, and sometimes you present what you love as the out there talkability, creative idea that you'd love to do, and you end up, or the client ends up buying an idea which is a bit more safe, shall I say, and a bit less exciting. Sometimes from a professional point of view, you bite your tongue and say, okay, well, the client's happy with that. That's okay. So that's the professional bit of me. And you asked about an instance where, maybe, we might have challenged a client more and kind of went beyond our comfort zone. And there's certainly one that springs to mind in that respect. And that was early days of the agency, so early 2000s. And I had this idea for the New Scientist magazine, who came to us to pitch for their business alongside a few different other creative agencies. And they wanted an idea or an activation that would increase subscriber numbers. And New Scientist at that time was very much perceived as a title read or publication read by people interested purely in science, sort of white men in white coats with Bunsen burners was the sort of imagery that conjured up when you thought the New Scientist in those days. And they wanted to broaden their appeal. and be more interesting and more relevant to more people. So I remember reading the magazine a few times, and bearing in mind I was absolutely crap at science at school and had no scientific ability. I didn't do any exams in science. I was absolutely rubbish at science, and I'm not a ton of interest in it, to be fair, either. So my scientific knowledge was poor, which was probably good when it went to coming up with an idea. I remember reading through the magazine. I actually really quite liked the magazine, and it was, I sort of conceptualized it as being, sort of a bit about life and a bit about death, and actually everything in between of that. And it was the death bit that started to fascinate me as I was sort of ruminating over it and thinking, how can we create talkability? And anyway, I came up with the idea for them, which was in order to boost circulation numbers and boost readership numbers to get more people into the New Scientist, actually was to run a promotional competition. And the promotional competition was a rather unusual competition. It was actually billed as the weirdest competition in the world. And it was to win the chance to live forever, which meant that the winner, upon his or her death, got frozen in a vat of liquid nitrogen, flown out and transported to the Cryonics Institute in Michigan. They were going to be the fulfillers of the prize, and then preserved for eternity in this minus 500 degrees C environment. And at such stage in the future, as medical science had improved and advanced enough, they would be defrosted, presumably thawed out, and hopefully cured of what they died from in the first place. So that was what the winner was going to win.
Amazing.
And the publisher and the marketing team absolutely loved it. They thought it was brilliant. It was kind of ticked all the boxes. They said, right, we're going to go for this idea. They came back to me a couple of days later and said, bit of a problem. The editor won't have it. I said, well, won't have it. He goes, well, he says it's not proper science. It's not scientific enough. There's no scientific fact in it, blah, blah, blah. And I thought, going back to your point about being challenging, I thought, no, I'm not giving up on this idea. I love this idea. It'll go everywhere. It'll be brilliant. Let's kind of go for it. So I said, can I see the editor? So there I was a couple of days later in his little reception area of the editor's office of the New Scientist. Obviously, my scientific knowledge is zero. Editor of New Scientist's scientific knowledge pretty bloody good. I'm thinking, okay, I'm a bit outnumbered here, but I'll do my best. And so I'm reading that. I remember that he had like the first issue of the magazine, first issue of the New Scientist magazine, front page headline, 1950 something, whatever it was, colour TV. It'll never happen. I went, oh, okay, it's interesting. So I got in to see the editor, and he goes, this idea. He goes, I get it. It's funny. I sort of see what you're doing here, but chronics and bringing people back to life, it'll never happen. I go, funny you say that, but I was just reading your first edition magazine of 30 odd years ago, 40 years ago in reception, and you said colour TV will never happen, and then it did. So, maybe science can advance and change, and stuff you couldn't predict might happen at some stage in the future. And bearing in mind, we're not saying cryonics might work for another 300, 400, 500 years. Maybe in that time period, it could work. He goes, yeah, okay. So I kind of can see I'm winning around. Then his second point, which was like the big one, but he didn't realise that I had a ace up my sleeve for this one, was he goes, but once you're dead, you're dead. You can't. Nothing can be frozen. It can't be kept alive. And I thought, funny you should say that, because a few years earlier, my twins had been born thanks to the miracles of fertility treatment. We'd had embryos frozen, sperm frozen, eggs frozen, everything, frozen, and obviously been brought back to life and created life. So I told him about, we talked about that and fertility treatment and the freezing of eggs and embryos and stuff like that. And I said, well, look, can be brought back to life. Got a couple of little twins that are kind of living, breathing proof of that. He goes, okay. Anyway, so I managed to persuade him on a scientific argument that actually it was possible. He labelled it as fringe science. And a month or so later, the competition ran, the coverage went in globally, around the world and back in terms of the coverage we got. And the results for the New Scientist were brilliant. Circulation shot up. Subscriptions were up after this little campaign. And we did it as a token collect over 5 weeks. Subscriptions were up 19%, which was the biggest ever increase they ever saw. The other concession we gave to the editor was that the competition was win the chance to live forever, or in small print, or you can live for now. So, thinking of fulfilling a prize, it might have been a bit of a logistical nightmare if you've got to wait until someone dies to fulfill a prize. Like, how do you know when that's going to happen? So that was a bit of an issue. So we offered the chance to live for now, which was basically a holiday in Hawaii. Anyway, the winner of the competition did choose the holiday in the Hawaii as opposed to the chronic stream. So it made the fulfillment bit a bit easier for any other PR people out there thinking, well, how are you ever going to make that happen? What happens when the guy dies in 50 years' time? Is the agency going to be about or whatever? To make that happen is the new science. And it didn't matter because they went for the holiday in Hawaii, which is a much cheaper option. But sometimes you got a challenge. And, like I always say to people, kind of never take no for an answer. It's a really good principle to live by in this business when people say, no, you can't have this, you can't have that. Obviously, don't get too stubborn about it or too hot-headed about it. But if you really believe in something, then challenge it, and you never know what's going to happen. And in this case, it led to one of our best ever campaign for the New Scientist, and a brilliant campaign for the agency.
Brilliant. I love that. What an incredible story. And it's funny that you mentioned, first of all, that you're twins. Did you say they're 25 years old now?
They are, yes. Yeah.
So they're the same age as the agency. So you were starting...
They were born in March 2000 and I set the agency in September. Some would say not an ideal year to set up a business. They would put that hurdle in front of them. Twins was a bit of a shocker. They're only kids as well. So, it was a bit of a life-changing experience. And then to set up an agency 6 months later, equally so, actually.
But clearly you're always up for the challenge and up for the fight. You talked about your competitive nature earlier. And I just wanted to unpack that moment when you decided, I'm not letting go of this idea. I'm going to go into TV editor. Because I feel like a lot of other people maybe said, oh, okay, well, they've upstairs have said no, so we've got to go away and think of something else. Whereas you clearly believed in the idea. You went in with, I guess, a bit of a plan because you had that idea of your twins in the back of your head.
Personal experience, yeah.
But then you came across this first issue on the table, which gave you the colour TV idea as well. Tell me, is this a running theme? Do you have incredible powers of improvisation to go into a situation and persuade people to do stuff?
I don't know. I think it's belief. Sometimes if you believe in an idea, then this job is about selling as well. You're part salesperson when you're doing it. You're selling yourself to your bosses or people within your business as a person. You're selling yourself to clients as a trusted authority or someone that they believe can look after your business. You're selling ideas to clients. If you're a creative agency like Frank, then you're selling ideas, story, thoughts, the whole time. And you're selling the idea then into media, influencers, journalists, whoever as well. So, sales is an important part of it. And there is definitely a technique to selling. And fun enough, you say that, you think, it's an ability I've got. When I was a kid, my first ever job I had was telesales, actually getting on the phone, calling up people at home back in the day, trying to sell them exterior textured wall coating for the outside walls of their houses.
Oh, it's you we have to blame for that then, isn't it?
Well, back in the day. But, not that I would profess to wanting to build a career out of that, but it was about the best training I've ever got for selling, for dealing with objections, which you're going to get the whole time, for getting around those objections sometimes. And it's also the best way of rejection. The amount of times I got told to F off, when you're calling someone, and they're home at 8:30 at night when they just want to settle down and watch TV or whatever, and interrupting them was, happened the whole time. So it really hardens you, I think, and it improves the skills in that respect. And I think, personally, that was probably about, the best experience I had for that aspect of it. I think you've got to think on your feet a bit and you're thrust into different situations. Just you talking now reminds me of another campaign, which also was a legendary Frank campaign, really legendary, where for HP Source, we got briefed to HP Source, which kind of goes back years now, but still gets talked about today and still gets brought up by the media today. We did, to try and increase awareness of HP Source at a key time for them. We got involved with the sport of snooker because that was what was happening at the time. They wanted the campaign to activate. We thought, how could we get involved in snooker? Long story short, came up with the idea to sponsor the brown ball in snooker because it's the HB sauces. Brown sauce, not any old ball. We don't sponsor all snooker balls, just the brown ball. And to commemorate the deal, we managed to get Jimmy White, good old sort of English snooker player, to change his name by deed bowl to Jimmy Brown. Actually preferred James Brown, preferred his full name. He played in the English Masters tournament, the UK Masters, which was live, 200 hours of broadcast coverage on TV, and he played in this tournament as Jimmy Brown, and we'd sponsored the brown ball. It went everywhere because everyone said, "Oh, what's happening? It should be banned. We can't do this. It's advertising, blah blah blah." Serious message about money coming in creative sponsorships in sport, all that sort of stuff. So it just, whenever the campaign went mad, and HB Sauce sales just went off the charts and ended up being a client to this day, one of the people that we pitched to. But I remember doing the pitch, I pitched to two lovely people who one was a Frenchman, Thomas de Labriere, and one was a Malaysian, Avakar Jolly, both of whom have had stellar careers since. And neither of them had a clue what I was on about. They kind of, this was a traditional British brand. Snooker, I remember Thomas going, "Snooker, explain to me how you play." Like that. So kind of to sell that was, Avakar, I think, kind of knew snooker a bit more, but didn't really get the relevance of that and kind of the humour. Anyway, the amount that I had to go into selling in that idea to two clients who were totally, actually, when I was thinking afterwards, how come they ended up working on HB Sauce, which is the classic British, iconic British brand. It was two people who couldn't have known less about iconic Britishness naturally because they didn't grow up in that environment. Maybe that was a good ploy because then they could think a bit differently about out of the box. Anyway, so it was a massively hard sell. Their boss was English, a guy called Graham White, who was lovely as well. And when he saw the idea, I think he got it more. But the sell was a hard sell, and sometimes, the rest is history on that campaign. Sometimes you've got to sell and you've got to carry on selling and not give up, and that perseverance, and that if you believe in something, kind of you've got to go for it. And maybe we give up a bit too easily sometimes, particularly in this day and age. If we're seeing campaigns, like we said at the start of this little segment, particularly if we're seeing campaigns that aren't as challenging as professional we might want to see, maybe we're giving up a bit too easily.
And clearly that has held you in good stead, because one of the other things that people know about Frank is that you managed to negotiate one of the greatest deals or series of deals in the history of particularly consumer PR, acquisitions, mergers. Could you explain, well, first of all, just explain what happened, but I'd love to dig into the personal experience that you felt, the emotional unpacking of that whole experience as well.
I think the sort of background to it was we had a lot of interest because of all this work we're doing, the body of work we're doing. We're an independent agency, growing quickly, like you see a lot of agencies these days on that similar trajectory. It's a good trajectory to be on. It's a hard trajectory to be on in terms of managing that and dealing with that, how to come up, still be creative, come up with award-winning work and grow a business from a revenue point of view and a profit point of view. But we were doing that, and it's always been, I've always loved the creative side, but I've always also loved the commercial side. So it was a very tightly and well-run business. So it's making good money and coming up with great campaigns. I'll let the police car go past. Not coming for you. Don't worry, no, not coming for me. Not coming for me. None of the campaigns have gone that far that they would be coming for me. So coming up with great campaigns and making money at the same time. And we were subject. I was getting a call quite regularly from either intermediaries or direct from other groups. And we got to about 2006, and there was one group that got very serious with us, a PLC group called Creston, who was still about, I think, today in another guise. They're the Unlimited group. And I remember meeting with them, and they had a couple of guys, the finance director and CEO, who were great guys. And we sort of talked about doing a deal, and I liked the sound of that deal. And I said, I just want to grow the business a bit more before sealing that deal with you. Will you wait for me a year, or can we keep the same kind of template for the deal? Obviously, our profit will be at a number that I wanted it to get to, and then we'll do it. And I said, if you'll keep the same terms. And they said, absolutely, shook hands on that. Came back a year later. I'd grown the business to where I wanted to get, and I had my target number, and then all the numbers stacked up after that. And I said, okay, we're ready to do the deal. And they said, yeah, the terms are still the same. And we started progressing with that, with Creston, and in good faith. They then started to expand into America and started to do lots of other stuff. And I think they probably got a bit disinterested in the deal, and it was sort of lagging a little bit. And I kind of didn't really know. We sort of got the paperwork, but I'd engaged KPMG to help me do the deal. My wife, who was helping out as finance director for a number of years, working as finance director, not just helping out, she was finance director, knew someone at KPMG who was the head of M&A there. I said, look, I've got this deal on the table with Preston. Can you help me now? I don't really know what to do when it comes to all the paperwork and the terms and the metrics. This is uncharted territory. I'd done it all myself up until that point. He said, sure. Come in for a meeting with the KPMG, proper, good advisors. Next day or later after meeting, he phoned me up. David Elms, his name, is still about, very, very smart guy. He said, look, I've got these other guys. We've got these clients in Australia who are coming over next week. He goes, I know you're kind of down the path with these Creston guys, but might be worth talking to these guys. Always good to have two parties in play. And I don't know much about them. Our Sydney office has sent an email. Just meet with them for a coffee next week. So they came over from Australia. I met with them for coffee next week. We hit it off like anything. I got on brilliantly with their chairman and with their CEO and their head of PR group. They're a big Australian marketing services group called Photon. They bought about 50 agencies in Australia and New Zealand and were keen to expand in the UK. I think they just looked at the list in the PR Weekly tables of the top independent agencies, and we were number 2 or 3 at the time, and they were kind of going down the list, seeing who they could get. They didn't know a ton about us. It didn't really matter as long as we were a good business. And literally, that happened within a month. I negotiated with these Australians. I had KPMG to give me a little bit of advice. There were a few hiccups along the way and a few stressful moments, like I'm sure there are with every deal. But literally 5-6 weeks later, we signed and sealed a deal. And their offer just blew the Creston offer out the water. It wasn't even close.
It was mad multiple, wasn't it?
It was mad multiple. I mean, it was all public if anyone can be bothered to look, because they were a public company. But the deal they did at the time, which is kind of good metrics, I guess, for any other agency bosses listening, was they paid on day one 6 times profit, EBITDA, in cash, upfront on day one, and plus whatever cash we had in the business they bought out as well. The tax treatment was slightly different then, because there was such a thing as entrepreneurs relief. So it was very, it's very good. So that was payment 1. Payment 2 was after 2 years, and basically based on as fast as I grew the agency after that, then they paid more of a multiple. So it was a multiple of 6 if you grew it at 10% a year, multiple of 7 if you grew it up, 15% a year, multiple of 8. I can't remember the exact numbers, but that was the principle. Anyway, we hit the number where we hit the 9 times multiple.
That's incredible.
So there was another payment after 2 years, and that carried on for another 2 years. So it's a 4-year earn out, where there's another payment after the next 2 years, and again at the 9 times. The total value of the deal ended up being just about £25 million.
It's incredible.
They paying for Frank. They couldn't pay it all, as happens with a lot of earnouts. They didn't have the money. They'd done this deal with a few other agencies, and a few other agencies had knocked the ball out of the park like Frank had over that period. And they were facing a bit of a meltdown in Australia and confidence in their business model from their shareholders. They're a public company. So they had to do a deal, and they did a deal with me over the final payment. And effectively, the deal that I did with them was that in return for some of the cash that they owed me, they gave me back 25% of the business. So we got to a situation. The next deal I did in 2013 was I had 25% of the business back for free, essentially, in terms of ownership of the business. So then we went forward. So for 4 years, we're completely owned by them, 100% owned by. They then renamed to Enero to get put behind them, sweep under the carpet their issues where they kind of imploded a bit. They had a new CEO as well, who was actually the CEO of one of the other agencies that had sold about the same time as I'd sold. And, it was a very nice chap, Matt Malouche. The relationship was great. They didn't never mess with the business. They never interfered. And that was important when I sold the business. I didn't want anything to change. I was still relatively young, still wanted to work, still loved it. I didn't want to sell to anyone that disrupted that and changed that. When I talked about other people being interested in buying Frank, there were all sorts of other groups that were all very aware of their names. But what would have got involved would have kind of tried to merge us in with other stuff, had us doing other stuff in the group. I didn't want to do that. I loved what I did. I just wanted to crystallize the value that I created in the business for myself and the other shareholders at the time. Another bike going past, crystallize that success for myself and the other shareholders at the time, and not change how it worked. I thought if I sold to Australians, it's probably likely that it's not going to change the way I work because they're 11 hours ahead. How much can you interfere with the business that's 11 hours ahead? That was a big factor in my decision to sell to these Australians. And then obviously from a financial point of view, I worked pretty well. So 2013, I had 25% of the business back. And actually I'd had a lot of clauses inserted in that deal which protected the business and protected my decision making. So they couldn't hire or fire anyone without my permission. They couldn't do anything to the business that was going to affect the EBITDA without my sign off. So they they didn't really have any control over the business. By the same token, I couldn't do that without their sign off. So it's 25%. It was more like a 50-50 partnership. But they were happy. Their business was still delivering the goods, still producing good profit for them, was still an integral part of their numbers when they totted them up and presented them to their city. And we got on well. I kind of got on well dealing with them. I was very transparent with them. I was very open and honest with them. I was very frank with them, I guess. And I think they really appreciated that. So I think Aussies are like that naturally as well. So it's a good relationship, really good relationship. So that was the next deal. Fast forward then to about 2016, 17. I'd had enough, to be honest. And it's kind of quite, sort of well known here. I'd sort of lost my mojo, I guess. And if I look back on it, I was a bit burnt out. I was completely knackered. 17 years of running a business at the top had taken its toll. I hadn't been well. I'd had a little problem with a blocked artery in my heart, which was as the guy from Nenero said, he goes, that might have been a bit of a tap on the shoulder from the big man upstairs. Maybe it kind of was. And I wanted to slow down and take it a bit easier. So I went down to a day a week. I would have sort of quit then, to be honest, but the Aussies didn't want me to go. They said, no, you need to be chairing this business. You put in place who you want to run it, and we'll back that, and to just keep an eye out for it, because if you're keeping an eye out for it, then you're keeping an eye out for us, because obviously they were 75% shareholders. So I went, okay. So I went down to a day and a half a week, but wasn't really doing that. I'd lost interest completely. Anyway, business started to go off the board quite rapidly. From a profile point of view, I think it was still there. We were still doing some good work, or I guess burning on fumes a little bit. But from a business point of view, it was a bit crap, and the business was going downhill. Profits were declining. It was getting to the odd month where we weren't making any money. The Australians were getting worried, and they said, Gigi, you've got to get more involved in this again. Come back and help out and try and put right what's wrong, because we don't like where this is going. And they were right. And I did start, and COVID was just about to be a thing as well, which obviously wasn't helpful. So I got back involved and started getting my hands dirty, started to see what was wrong with the business. We basically lost, long story short, we'd lost the creative culture. We'd become a bit too big for our boots, a bit too cocky, a bit too unable to deal with certain situations that we should have dealt with. And, the business wasn't really being run very well by the people running it. It's being run as a nice business, but that wasn't working because it was losing money. So I got back involved, made a lot of structural changes, tried to get the agency's creative mojo back, get my mojo back. And I found I was getting my mojo back. And then I thought, well, why am I doing this for only 25%? That was the natural commercial guy within me. And I thought, I kind of no point in really banging my head against a brick wall. I might as well, if I'm going to save this agency and turn around the oil tanker, it's got to be more in it for me and my team that I'm doing it with. And that led to a conversation with the Australians again, now with a new CEO I'd never met before. I'd only spoke to on Zoom and Teams because of COVID and never been over to the UK because he couldn't get here and I couldn't get to Australia. So we did it all via Zoom. I said, I want to, kind of do a deal for your 75% and take the business completely independent again. And that took a bit of time because they're a public company and they've got certain processes to deal with and certain governance issues. But that took about 6 months, 9 months to do. But I did an MBO and managed to buy out their 75%, returning back to full independence and 100% owned by the shareholders. So that was lovely, and that was 2021, and that was Independence Day in 2021. That was significant for the agency, and since 2021, the agency has found a new lease of life again. I think everyone in the market has seen that we're producing the work that kind of is reminiscent of, with a modern tweak and a different, obviously, media landscape, etc. But the swagger of the agency is back a little bit. The reputation of the agency is as high, as good as it's ever been. And, the fun times are back and the profitability started to get back on track significantly. And then last year, I did another deal, which I think might well be it for deals with Frank. I sold, all the shareholders sold, myself and the other shareholders sold the business to an employee ownership trust. So Frank PR is now actually owned by the Frank PR Employee Ownership Trust Limited, and is the beneficiaries of the value of the business that we're creating now are the staff, are the people that work here. So we're now, I didn't make too fuss about going in. A lot of people sort of started shouting about EOTs. I didn't really see the need to. Everyone that works here knows it. Our clients know it, and it's a big positive, I think, on many fronts. But for me, it was a lovely way of keeping the legacy alive, of ensuring that the business, not ensuring, but hopefully meaning the business can stay independent, because I think it's its natural environment. It's a bit of a brand that likes its own space, that wouldn't really play nicely as part of a big group. Australians and Photon and Nero, and they let us play by ourselves and at our own devices. But I think I got incredibly lucky with the people that I sold the business to, in that they let us do that. And because most of you here, you and I know many people in this industry that have sold their business to other people, and there's horror stories abound, and life's horrible and miserable, and
Most of them are like
most of
that.
them are, exactly. So
Yeah.
I got bloody lucky with that. I wouldn't like to take that chance again, and I don't think lightning will strike twice in that respect. I don't want to push the luck. I think Frank's better off as an independent agency, and thrives on being an independent agency. And I thought an EOT would be a lovely way to help the best chance of preserving that.
And that's an incredible story. That's an absolutely incredible story. And I think one that probably wouldn't be repeated again in our economy, in our industry.
No, it was a time. The other thing to say from an point of view, Adrian, which was a good point, was the deal was in September of 2007, and in October 2007 was what they then started to refer to as the global financial crisis. That started to happen. So, from a timing point of view, I was just lucky, to be honest, getting in a month early before markets went into meltdown and this global financial crisis was triggered. And probably there weren't that many deals that happened, or certainly not many deals at that crazy multiple. And also, I come across a very acquisitive group who were well backed in Australia to go off and kind of conquer the world. This little Australian outfit to conquer the world was their ethos, and maybe had kind of had ideas above their station, perhaps, if you look back with hindsight, and were well backed financially. And I and a few other agencies were, that sold to them, were the beneficiaries of that. You got to get lucky. The timing fell into place. I mean, to a certain extent, you make your own luck, but I did get also, very, very lucky. That's for sure.
And tell us about the future. And so, 25 more years of Frank. What's it going to be? What can we expect there?
25 more years of Frank. I don't know. Probably not with me at the helm. If it is, then I get bloody worried if I'm still doing this in 25 years' time. Look, I mean, I think hopefully 25 years' time we can stay true to our DNA, just being bold, culturally fluent, and culturally relevant, and creatively fearless. Where that takes us, I don't know. I think Talkability is widely becoming an industry standard in terms of a word or a phrase that's used. I mean, I've never gone about to assert our trademark as much as perhaps I should, because it is a trademark of Frank and it is a methodology that we've adopted. So maybe there's some options to expand that strategic methodology as we go forward. Hopefully we can still, maintain our role as the leaders in emotional storytelling. It's going to integrate AI, behavioral science, meme psychology, real-time cultural trend forecasting a bit more as well. So hopefully we can do that, and hopefully as well we can still stay independent.
Yeah, and stay lucky and keep up for a good fight, right?
Exactly. Stay lucky, stay healthy, stay lucky, and enjoy what you do. I always say to people, and as I get older, I appreciate it more. It's just been, what a job. I mean, PR is such a great career, such a great industry to work in, such a great bunch of people you get to work within it. It's kind of never felt like work, and it's never felt like a job. Ever since I got into it, even from before Frank, I've kind of loved it. And if I can create and we can continue with an environment of Frank where for the people that work here it feels like that, then that's a pretty nice legacy.
What beautiful words to finish on. Thank you very much for joining us, Gigi.
Thanks for having me, my friend.
All right, cheers.
Cheers.